And you're good to go.
Thanks, Katie. Good morning, everyone. It's September 14th, 2022 at 10 a.m. We're having a special meeting of the Transportation Standing Committee. Thank you all for attending. I call this meeting to order, and our first order of business is to acknowledge that Halifax Regional Municipality is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. The municipality acknowledges the peace and friendship treaties signed in this territory and recognizes that we are all treaty people. So today, as this is a special meeting we've called because there's a somewhat urgent matter to discuss. Not all of our members are here today. We have regrets from Councillor Outthit, and I believe Councillor Kent is still on her way back from Winnipeg from the police governance. So I will go through the role of who is here today. We'll start with Vice Chair Councillor Iona Stoddard. Let's have a mic check, please.
Morning, Mr. Chair and colleagues.
Good morning, Iona, and we'll go to Councillor Mancini.
Here, colleagues, everyone.
And last but not least, Councillor Russell.
Good morning from wonderful Lower Sackville.
Excellent, thank you. In the unlikely event we need the solicitor, Colin, you online?
Yes, I am here.
Colin Taylor joining us today, and Katie Campbell is our legislative assistant, and we have a ton of staff in the room today, so I won't go through you all, and we'll get to that when we get to the order of business or the actual business. So next is the approval of the order of business and approval of additions and deletions. As this is a special meeting, I don't think there can be any additions and deletions, but I will check with the clerk. Madam Clerk.
There are no additions or deletions.
And members of the committee, I don't think it would be in order actually to add anything to a special meeting, but does anybody have anything they want to try?
I'd like to move for the approval of the order of business as presented.
Excellent. Love that move. Seconded by Councillor Stoddard. Any further discussion on the single item agenda? Seeing none, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Thank you. Next is the call for declaration of conflict of interest. Anybody have any shares in any bollard companies or sign manufacturers? No? Okay. All right. We'll move on. Thank you very much. Item 4, Spring Garden Road Transit Only Project. I believe we have a staff presentation. I think it's Mike Connors and his team.
Good morning. Can you hear me? And you can see me?
We can see you. You're a little quiet. You may need to speak up.
How about that? Better? Okay.
Perfect.
I will share my screen. Just give me a second here. Can you see my screen now?
We can.
PowerPoint
Correct.
presentation? Okay.
Yes.
I'll make sure I shared the right screen. Okay, right on. Okay, good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Mike Connors, manager with Transportation Planning. Happy to be here with this morning at this special meeting to talk about the Spring Garden Road project and give you a sense for what staff proposes for next steps on this pilot project. So I assume most of you have probably read the report, but I'll give you probably a 10-minute overview of what's in there, and of course give you an opportunity to answer some questions that you likely have. So I'll start with some background. So back in December of last year, Regional Council directed staff to implement a pilot project on Spring Garden Road that would close the section of Spring Garden Road between Queen Street and South Park Street to general purpose traffic each day between 7 a.m. and 8 p.m. Council advised that the pilot should commence in June of 2022. Council also directed staff to monitor the project and check in with the Transportation Standing Committee after 6 months with an update, and then return to Council after the completion of the pilot with a final recommendation moving forward for Spring Garden Road. So the primary objective of the Spring Garden Road pilot project is to gain a better understanding of how the removal of general purpose traffic can enhance the street's potential as a pedestrian-oriented street, while continuing to serve its important function in the regional transit network. So why are we back here today? Or did I skip sorry. So again, the pilot project, just a little bit more background, the pilot project applies to the section of Spring Garden Road between Queen Street and South Park Street. The pilot regulations prohibit traffic from using Spring Garden Road along this section between 7 and 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. with the exception of buses and bicycles and pedestrians, of course. One exception to the rule is that left turns would be permitted out of Brenton Street due to the one-way configuration of that street. Between 8 p.m. and 7 a.m., the street would be open for use by all traffic. So why are we back here today, just a few months after the pilot was to begin? Obvious answer is that it didn't go well, didn't go according to plans, and this morning I'm here to talk to you about why that is, as well as what staff proposed to do next. So the pilot project started on July 4th and was paused just 4 days later to allow staff to reevaluate the approach to implementation. There are a few key factors that have influenced the result of the pilot today. I'll discuss these in further detail in this presentation, but we'll introduce them right now. Firstly, construction impacts. Construction on Spring Garden Road and the surrounding area has taken longer than expected and has added challenges to the operation of the pilot. Delays associated with the Spring Garden Road streetscaping project itself have been a challenge that have been busy for staff to manage over the past several months. But impacts from other nearby construction projects have also created issues. Most notably, the work on South Park Street, which impacted local routing options during the start of the pilot. Another major factor in the challenges to date is that traffic restrictions on Spring Garden Road for the pilot are more difficult to communicate to drivers than we had originally expected. It is now clear that a more robust traffic control plan will be required. Finally, it should be considered that this is a unique pilot project and there isn't a design guide or rule book that we look to, nor really any relevant examples, directly relevant examples from other places. The nature of a pilot project is to test an idea, ideally as cost effectively as possible, and learn lessons about what works and what doesn't. So over the next number of slides, I will discuss how the project was implemented, how it operated in practice, and after that, I'll review some traffic control options that staff have been reviewing for potential use in the pilot and outline proposed next steps for the pilot project. So start with implementation. Prior to implementation, a communications plan was deployed in the days and weeks leading up to the pilot to spread awareness to residents and businesses. The pilot was promoted through social media and radio. Mail-outs with project information were sent out to area residents and businesses. Staff also engaged with the Spring Garden Area Business Association and hosted pop-up information sessions on the street. A project banner was also created, which was to be installed above the street. However, due to production delays, it was not received until after the pilot was actually paused. So the traffic control plan that was used did rely on traffic signage. Regulatory signs were installed on all intersection approaches to identify the movements onto Spring Garden Road that were prohibited to staff between the operational period between 7 a.m. and 8 p.m. While indicating that buses and bicycles were exempt from these regulations. So this photo shows you the signs on the Queen Street northbound approach to Spring Garden Road. Similarly, on the westbound approach, Spring Garden Road westbound approach to Queen Street. So these signs that are in place, they are regulation signs. Admittedly, they appear fairly small for traffic to be able to understand them, particularly when they're approaching a green light. But there are factors and constraints around what size of signs can go on these poles that need to be considered as well. And then on the approach to Birmingham Street, this is the southbound approach on Birmingham Street to Spring Garden Road. So traffic on these side streets was permitted to cross Spring Garden Road, but not turn left or right onto Spring Garden Road. So this is the way the signage worked on those approaches. In terms of operation, so we're here today. Obviously, the pilot didn't work as intended and had significant challenges, but I want to start with some positive observations. Hope some of you had a chance to check it out, but during the periods when it did work and people observed the regulations, we did get a very nice glimpse into the significant potential that Spring Garden Road has as a pedestrian-focused streets. When the traffic were not on the street, it was noticeably quieter and calmer, and bus operation was more efficient. Pedestrians, very easy to cross at intersections. The bus stops were easy for the buses to access. It really did work quite well when it was working. Halifax Regional Police officers were on site to help with education and enforcement. The intent was that early in the project, particularly early in the project, the focus would be more on education than on enforcement to provide people with a chance to adjust to the changes. You can see one of the officers blocking traffic onto trying to access that section of Spring Garden Road. And of course, the reason we're here today is that the pilot project, as implemented on the 4th of July, had significant challenges. Traffic largely did not observe the restrictions through much of the operational period. And it's evident now that traffic signage alone did not clearly communicate the traffic restrictions. When the pilot was successful, it was typically during periods when HRP officers were present at the Queen Street and South Park Street intersections, as shown on the previous slide. However, there are resourcing challenges with HRP that left some of those shifts unfulfilled. And in any case, it is considered impractical to have police officers on site on a full-time basis enforcing these restrictions. So why has the project been such a challenge? A couple of key factors that I'll go through. Firstly, coordinating implementation with construction on Spring Garden Road itself and in the surrounding area. There's been a lot of construction in the area and timelines have been very uncertain. The original intent for the Spring Garden Road pilot project was that it would immediately follow substantial completion of the major works in the right-of-way on Spring Garden Road last December. That was intended to take advantage of driver expectations that were established during construction. However, the implementation was pushed to June and then it was further delayed into July due to construction on South Park Street. The traffic regulations are quite difficult to implement for a few key reasons. The regulations are mode selective, meaning that general purpose traffic is prohibited from accessing the street, but buses and bicycles still need to use it. It would be easier to implement, for example, if all traffic was prohibited from the street, as we could simply set up barriers and leave them in place. However, Spring Garden Road is a very important transit street and we do need to continue to run buses on it. The traffic regulations are also time-based. General purpose traffic is only prohibited between 7 a.m. and 8 p.m. each day. This is physically difficult to implement and introduces complexity that likely confuses some street users. Also, there are multiple access points onto Spring Garden Road beyond the two primary entrance points at Queen Street and South Park Street. So access to Spring Garden Road from side streets like Dresden Row, Birmingham, and Brenton Street still need to be managed, which can be a challenge. And finally, as a pilot project that is temporary in nature, cost effectiveness is an important consideration. Ideally, this project should demonstrate the functionality of a traffic-free street with as little investment in infrastructure as possible. For the Spring Garden Road pilot, which does represent a fairly significant change in the way the street operates, striking an effective balance between functionality and implementation costs is a challenge. Our initial implementation underestimated the traffic control measures required to make the pilot work, and it's clear that another solution will be required. So, since the pilot was paused, staff have been reviewing potential traffic control options. I'll take a couple minutes and talk about some of those options that are also laid out in the report. So at the most basic level, we've developed a new signage plan that we expect will be more intuitive for drivers to understand. For example, replacing the turn restriction signs at Queen Street and South Park Street with do not enter signs, and replacing permissive signs on the side streets with restrictive signs. Drivers tend to respond better when you tell them what not to do rather than what they should do. Staff are also considering adding pavement markings such as reserved lane diamonds, which would also likely need to be augmented with text on the street to indicate the time of day exceptions. So a key takeaway from the initial pilot implementation is that physical measures in the street will likely need to play a key role in reinforcing these regulations. We've considered the potential use of temporary physical measures such as traffic pylons or barrels to physically block or narrow entry lanes onto Spring Garden Road. Signage would be attached to these barrels to help reinforce the traffic regulations. Here's an example of what this could look like at the Queen Street intersection, a fairly crude mock-up by myself, but although we expect that this would be an effective means to an extent, there are operational factors that really limit its potential for use over an extended period of time. For example, the barriers would need to be set up every morning, removed every evening, and stored overnight. Ongoing monitoring would be required to ensure that the barriers remained in place. Winter operations would also be a challenge. So, as mentioned, we do think this could work for a short period, but really it's not suitable for a longer term implementation that we had planned for this project. Traffic signal changes. So we've also considered how we might modify the traffic signal configuration at the Queen Street and South Park Street intersections to better convey the regulations, and that would be done using transit and bicycle signal phases. This type of scenario would involve adding signal phases at the intersection that would allow buses and bikes to proceed onto the pilot section of Spring Garden Road, while general purpose traffic would be required to make a left or a right turn, for example. We do expect that this would work well in practice, and there's a solution that would be available, but the cost to modify the signals would be significant, probably talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it would be likely excessive for a temporary installation. I think that if the project ultimately is successful and council decides that they want to do this permanently, a traffic signal solution may be an appropriate long-term solution. Automated access gates is something else we looked at, and it appears that it could be applicable to Spring Garden Road. The idea here is that the gates would block access to the street and would only open for authorized vehicles. In this case, buses and other exceptions, such as emergency vehicles, garbage trucks, etc. Halifax Transit currently uses access gates to control access at the Highfield Terminal in Dartmouth, which is shown on the screen. They use the MacPass to open those and close them, while other vehicles aren't able to do so with their MacPass. And we've been quite intrigued by another project that we've seen from Banff, Alberta, that uses automated gates on a similar project. So Banff Avenue, which is shown on the screen here, which is the town's, basically their Spring Garden Road. It's been closed to general purpose traffic during the summer months each year since 2020. So this is the third year that it's been in operation. Similar to Spring Garden Road, and these are very rare examples to find, the street also allows buses to use the street. So traffic can access it, but buses can. Under their project, they use an automated gate system that blocks traffic from entering the street, but the gate opens for buses and other authorized vehicles, such as emergency vehicles. They operate the gates using a fob system. We've been in contact with staff from the town of Banff to learn more about their experience with the project, and by all accounts, it is going quite well, and they do plan to keep it going. At this stage, we are encouraged by this option's potential for use on Spring Garden Road, but there are several factors that we need to consider further before we can know if it's applicable. For example, how would we operate the gates? Would MacPass work? Is it applicable with the number of buses we have on Spring Garden Road? For reference, I understand that in Banff they have 200 buses per day that operate the gates, which I thought was actually high, but 200 is a pretty good number of buses. We have much more than that on Spring Garden, so our solution, we need to consider that. Also, an important consideration is how do we install the gates? It would depend on physical space, vehicle turning requirements, all weather conditions, and things like that. So all these things would need to be considered further. Excuse me. So a couple of other considerations that I wanted to talk about. First of all is operational period. So the operational period, as a reminder, that was approved by council is 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. The intent for this period was to provide the benefits of a traffic-free street during the daytime when pedestrian traffic is busiest, and transit would most benefit from having traffic not getting in their way. And then it would allow vehicles back onto the street during the remaining hours to increase activity during slower periods. More recently, we've been considering whether a 24/7 operation period would be a better approach, in that it would simplify regulations and likely be less confusing for drivers. This approach may be worth considering for the pilot, but it is certainly recognized that it will require further engagement with area stakeholders to better understand how it would impact residents and businesses. Implementation timing is another important consideration in terms of when the pilot is reinstated. Ongoing construction on Spring Garden Road that's happening as we speak near the Queen Street intersection has closed the traffic, street to traffic likely into October, but the end date is uncertain. And as we've learned on other recent construction projects, the uncertainty is very real on a lot of construction projects, which impacts the timing of a project like this. Ideally, the pilot would be restarted to coincide with warmer weather months when street activity is at its highest and benefits of the project are most obvious. This is not a requirement by any means, but it is certainly preferable. And finally, and I would say most importantly, if additional traffic control measures are going to be considered, as is recommended currently by staff, additional time is going to be required, not only to complete planning and design work, but also to provide time to procure any necessary equipment and materials. Given what we've seen recently with supply chain issues across the board, this introduces considerable amount of uncertainty. We are targeting spring 2023 implementation, but we are cautious about its feasibility just based on this level of uncertainty. So, proposed next steps. First of all, we've recommended that we officially delay implementation of the project until 2023. We're proposing that an operational review is completed that looks at the traffic control options in more detail, as well as investigates the potential for an expanded operational period, potentially up to all day. That would require engagement, of course, with area stakeholders. Following that, we would return to the Transportation Standing Committee with a recommendation that includes a preferred traffic control option, identifies resources and costs required because there will be increased resources and costs associated with a more robust traffic control solution. And the recommendation would also include an implementation date, proposed operational period, and a proposed pilot duration, all of which would be impacted by the level of traffic control that is recommended. So the recommendation on the screen is what's in the report. You know, and it's basically I just summarized what it is on the previous screen. So we're recommending that we rescind our previous direction from council from December to proceed with a pilot project as planned, and then direct staff to complete an operational review and return back to TSC and ultimately council with a recommended implementation approach. That is all I have, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Connors. At this point, as it's in my area, I'd like to put the motion on the floor. So if I may, I'm going to turn the remainder of the discussion on this item over to Iona Stoddard as vice chair to chair, and I'll stay in the discussion on the motion until we get to the vote, if that's all right with everybody. Councillor Stoddard, you have the chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mason, for this opportunity to chair this meeting. Would you like to read the motion, please?
Yes, please. If I can kick us off, that'd be great. I'll move that Transportation Standing Committee recommend that Halifax Regional Council 1 rescind Regional Council's approved resolution for December 7th, 2021, directing the Chief Administrative Officer to proceed with a year-long daytime transit priority corridor pilot project on Spring Garden Road between South Park Street and Queen Street during the hours of 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. starting June 2022, and 2, direct the Chief Administrative Officer to complete an operational review to investigate additional traffic control measures and other operational needs that are required to operate a transit priority corridor pilot project on Spring Garden Road between South Park Street and Queen Street and return to the Transportation Standing Committee with a recommended implementation approach for the pilot project. I so move.
I'll second that.
Do you have anything on this, Councillor
I
Mason?
sure do, Vice Chair. So thank you very much, staff, for this. Colleagues, you know, when you do a pilot and when you do attempt to do something new, sometimes it's not going to work, and we know that, and this didn't work. I think that a lot of learning happened, not just for Spring Garden Road, but also for all of our various bike and transit efforts around the municipality. As Mr. Connor said, the signs that say you can do this don't work as well as the ones saying you can't do this. And frankly, I see that almost every day on Vernon Street at Jubilee and Jubilee on the local street bikeway. And I think this is good learning for us. And I hope the traffic side of the house and the sign side of the house is learning from this, because I think we're going to need to take a stricter approach across the board on a whole bunch of things. A question for staff would be, are we sure we need to wait until there's a gate? If we did, and why would we not consider mid-road flexible signs on springs, which are something that I've seen I was in Bangor, Maine 5 years ago, and I thought they get even more snow than us, and they're still there. They haven't been torn out. I was up there in May. Maybe they just installed them after a long winter. I don't know. So I'm interested in knowing, are we absolutely convinced it was going to require a physical change? I agree on the signals, and I also worry about if we have turn arrows, then it's going to be harder to deconflict pedestrians, and potentially that's our highest pedestrian walk area in downtown, volume of pedestrians. And if you have a green turn arrow, that's great. It tells the cars they can't go straight, but it also means, that the pedestrians would have to be stopped during that time. That arrow means they're allowed to go, is my understanding. So I'm wondering if staff can comment on how that might be done. What approach, why, I've had a lot of emails from residents saying, why are you going to wait until spring? Like, this is not a well-received report by the Twitterati and by activists. And I feel like the report, the way it reads, isn't the way it was pitched to me by staff when they were saying we're going to have to do a thing, and that's why we need to have this meeting early. The key piece here is that Brecon's just into the street on September 7th, doing work for at least a month in front of the block where Westwood is building the new building where Mills Brothers used to be. And if that goes a little late, as things are right now because of labor and supply chain, then by the time they're out of there and we could talk about installing things and changing behavior on the street and maybe digging a hole to put in a base for a gate or something, if that was possible in just 6 weeks, we would be at the beginning of the Christmas shopping season. And so my concern here is that we've got to balance the different users of the street. Spring Garden Road is benefiting greatly from all the stuff we've done. And now that the plantings are in and the trees are in, it actually looks great. It feels like you're in a different city than it did 2 years ago. But they also have the South Park University work Halifax Water was doing to separate the sewer and stormwater system, which is really important. And so they've had huge traffic impacts and construction basically continuously for 2 years, longer if you go back to the collapse of the crane and Hurricane Dorian. So for me, taking a pause on this makes a lot of sense. Those businesses need that, and I don't think that it's the right time to implement it. And I also worry, frankly, that if we tried to go into the street and do updates to the street, if we got snow early and the hot asphalt plants shut down, like, what do you do, right? And we were kind of there at the end of Spring Garden Road construction last year, and I don't want to do that again. So I support in principle. I've got a minute left, so I'm just going to say that my concern is that the way the report is written is, and we'll get back to you, and maybe in spring we'll do it. And I do want to make an amendment, and I'll come back after we hear from some other folks, and I'm going to put some time on it, and I'll talk about the amendment when we get there. But the message I want to give to the public is I think council needs to say clearly, we are doing this. There's good reasons to delay it, but we're doing it, and that it's not going to slide further to the right. And then my final question for staff is, final two questions are, one of the things we saw during the very brief pilot is this didn't help our problem with pedestrians blocking access on Birmingham. And I'm wondering if that's going to be addressed in this report as well. So right now, for folks who don't know, when you come out of Virtue or down the street where Woozles used to be, you get to Spring Garden Road, there's no lights at that intersection. And if it's summer on a nice sunny day, you might be waiting an hour before there's a break for in the pedestrians. And the residents basically are trapped there. They can't go the other way because the street's one way. So, we don't want to have to put signals there necessarily. There's other options. And I hate getting rid of the one-way pair there because that impacts parking, but I'm wondering if that's going to be considered as a part of this. And then the final question is, or comment is, I think 247 makes sense. I do. And I know that's going to be the biggest. You're going to spend 10% of your time talking about the final design, Mike, and you're going to spend 90% of your time talking to the businesses about what the implications of 247. And that's okay. And I'll be here to support that. But I just think it is going to be really confusing to keep going back and forth. If we can do some kind of loading exemption thing in the evening, like we're doing, where we're kind of being okay with some loading on Argyle Street, even though the street's closed, I think that could probably solve the issues. But anyway, those are my questions. I'll come back with my with the amendment. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. We have a lot of staff here. Wondering if there's any answers to Councillor Mason's questions, please.
Madam Chair, I can take a stab at a few of them. I might need Councillor Mason to remind me of a few of them. There was a lot there, but through you, Madam Chair, to the councillor, maybe I'll start with the why spring question. And talked about in the presentation, when we re-implement is very important. First of all, there's weather. We wanted to start during warm weather months if possible. October is not necessarily that cold, but if ideally we'd be in the spring. The construction uncertainty is significant. We've run into that on several other occasions. Other projects have gone over, and we need to be able to time this and communicate it properly to the public, to businesses and area stakeholders. We need to hit that date, and we've kind of not been able to do that in the past, and it's a big operational impact. And I guess the biggest thing with why spring is that we just don't know what to put in the street that works. We're quite confident that without a more robust solution that goes beyond, cones or barrels in the street, it's going to need to be supported by police, and it's going to have a lot of operating costs, and we don't see it lasting for more than, or being a solution that should be in place for more than a number of days or up to weeks. It's just not something that we expect would work well for a longer period of time. So that comes with a lot of operating costs and potentially for very little benefit. Having this in operation for only a short period of time doesn't let us get the full benefit. We won't see traffic patterns adjust to the changes. We do anticipate the first few days of this, we'll see a little bit of traffic congestion on either side of Spring Garden Road until people start realizing the new routing patterns. But by the time they figure it out, the pilot will be over. So that's one big factor in why spring. We really want to make sure we're doing it properly and with all the best information in hand. With respect to the signals, and how that would impact pedestrians, that's an interesting point. And that would certainly be a consideration in how the signals would ultimately be designed. Priority for pedestrians is always going to be paramount at Queen Street and South Park Street and Dresden Row. And all I can say is that we would make sure that we, if we move to a signal design, that would be top of mind, and how we time the signals, and pedestrians would have priority over vehicles, I would imagine, as that's designed. Why not barriers in the road is something we've heard a lot about in terms of blocking the street, blocking one side of the street. The big reason we don't see that working well here is that that would require, Spring Garden Road is only about 8 meters wide now, so we need to accommodate buses going in both directions. We have 800 buses a day on Spring Garden Road. We don't see buses going one at a time, taking turns, as being a viable solution. That's not something that we want to do right now. So that's kind of the big reason why we don't want to block the one entire side of the road. We see it just being an interim solution, being kind of narrowing the street to discourage people from non-transit vehicles from using it. Birmingham Street. That I would say we're looking at that right now. That is something that we're discussing with area businesses. We're looking at that and would hope to have feedback on that long before this report is back to TSC. So hope to have something on that soon. And 24/7 switch to an operational period of 24/7. Yeah, I agree that will be engagement with that group will be very important. And I'm sure there are a whole host of issues that we haven't thought of yet. And again, it might not be viable, but I do think that it's worth looking into and figuring out what the potential issues are. I'm not sure if I missed anything. If I did, let me know.
You got them all.
Thank you, Mr. Connors. Are you good with that, Councillor Mason? Awesome. The next person I have up is Councillor Mancini.
Mike, thanks for the presentation. You know, is it disappointing that the pilot didn't launch the way we all liked it? Of course it is. But as Councillor Mason said, we need to continue to try these new things. And I think that's something to celebrate. And I look at Spring Garden Road and the changes and the investment into the road. This is all good. And I hope our folks from traffic are watching this, because we've continued to ask them to try different things. And in the past, they've been reluctant to try different things, and it's okay to try different things. We've been talking to traffic folks of looking at lime green crosswalk signs and so on, and they've been reluctant, and not to get into that in a whole lot of detail now, but I think this is a good thing, and let's keep trying. Mike, you mentioned in the presentation that it's important to run buses on Spring Garden Road, but during the construction of the streetscaping, there were no buses going on Spring Garden Road. So I don't know if you can answer this, or someone from Transit's here. What was the impact to our transit when the transit could not go down Spring Garden Road? Did it still function? I mean, is there a possibility of doing Spring Garden Road without buses? That's my one question. The other question is about police. When we saw police at the start of the pilot be involved in redirecting vehicles, that worked well. It doesn't make sense to have police there all the time. For HRP is challenged with resources and don't have enough police officers. Plus at 120K a pop, that doesn't make sense to have a police officer redirecting traffic. But does it have to be police? Can we have, contract these traffic flagging organizations or other types of individuals hired to do so, to redirect people or vehicles? So, can we use somebody other than police? I agree the frustrating that we can't have the pilot continue on and start in October, but as mentioned, I agree with construction in the winter that a delay is okay. However, like Councillor Mason, I do agree that it should be a maybe. We should be a definitive time that, in March when spring starts, we're going to start this pilot. So we need to be ready, in my opinion, wholeheartedly, that we start this program, this pilot again in the spring, and not delay that start. So my questions around police and transit.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I may take the question related to police and then ask one of my colleagues in transit to talk about impacts during the construction. Through you to the councillor, Madam Chair. So we did look at options to have other resources directing traffic during the pilot. It comes down to moving violations, I believe, and the jurisdiction that police have. And I mean, in general, just having anybody there, police are an expensive resource to have there, and is it highest and best use of their services? Probably not. But having anybody there for an extended period of time is just going to add up, and it really not be I don't think a good way of spending operational money, having somebody there, all the time directing traffic. But in general, the operating, I believe it comes down to the moving violations in terms of why it had to be police.
Construction going on, we have contractors that are flaggers. They're not dealing with moving violations. Also, they're stopping and redirecting traffic. So I don't understand the point on moving violations, why it has to be police. We wouldn't be looking at violations. We would be saying, you can't come down here. And maybe we even hand out in the early stages a brochure, here's what's going on in Spring Garden Road, and here's all the shops that are open and supporting the downtown business at the same time. So I don't understand that moving violation piece.
And I don't have a full understanding of a moving violation in terms of, I know that that's what, in terms of how it's enforced, that's very important. But yeah, I don't have a good answer on why it wouldn't work for flaggers beyond.
Interrupt, but you even,
something.
yeah, sorry to interrupt, but you even said in your presentation that the first step is education, even with police there. So I'm not suggesting we have forever the duration of this program that we always have bodies there, but even for the first few months to educate people and direct them away from Spring Garden Road. And again, maybe it's an opportunity to promote the business at the same time by handing out physical information as we redirect people. Anyhow, you don't have that information. So maybe someone could speak to about the buses then, the transit.
Sure. Madam Chair, Patricia Hughes, the Director of Planning and Customer Engagement at Halifax Transit. I would say certainly the impact depends on your perspective and where you're trying to go. I would say the impact was pretty significant for passengers. So for a lot of passengers traveling through the area, made their trip quite a bit longer to detour off Spring Garden Road and go another way. It's also a significant destination. We know that passengers want to go to Spring Garden. When we did consultation, leading up to the Moving Forward Together plan, we talked about moving certain routes off, and it was never really well received. We know there's a variety of destinations to get to downtown, but Spring Garden is certainly one of the very important ones. Even workplaces that are a few blocks from Spring Garden, we see passengers getting off the bus there and getting a coffee first before going to work and whatnot. Also in terms of accessibility and walking distance to their work. So we feel like it's a very important place to bring transit passengers directly to and have those accessible connections. There's a lot of delays in backing up the buses on detour, issues with temporary bus stops on other roads and whatnot. And we're certainly very happy to be back on Spring Garden. And I'm sure a lot of passengers are too.
Thank you for that. So just last word on this. I'll wait for Councillor Mason's amendment, but I really hope we have a defined date that we start the pilot program. And I'm hoping that's early spring to 2023. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Next I have on the list is Councillor Russell, please.
Thank you very much. So I'm challenged with a number of things in addition to this report. The part of it is it is a fairly complex rule set for drivers to be able to follow. You can drive straight through on some streets. You can only turn left on others. You can do it through certain times a day. If you are driving a particular vehicle, then you can do it. And so I appreciate the effort. I appreciate that that there was an education piece. What I'm looking for is what the foundation was for the decisions that were made. And this is not something that I would expect in this meeting. This is something that I would look for in a further report about saying, why does it end at 8 p.m.? Why does it start at 7 a.m.? Why was Brenton Street not turned into two ways? Why was Birmingham Street not turned into two ways the entire length of it, or Dresden Row? I also find a challenge with one of the things from our previous traffic authority, Tasso. He was saying that a physical impediment to traffic is always better than a sign. And so the temporary barrels with the signage on them, they could have an effect. How would those work with buses? But on the flip side, replacing a sign with a sign, and excuse me for just a minute, replacing a sign with a sign that might work better. I would have to see strong justification of why one sign would work better than the other when signs inherently are less effective than physical measures. one of the other challenges is the bridge. It operates on a symmetric basis. It is 12 to 12. You are not able to, you know, you have 2 lanes in one direction for 12 hours a day. You don't need to know if it's morning or afternoon. It changes at 12. In this case, you need to know that it's at 7 a.m. and at 8 p.m. And if it was going to come back for reconsideration, I would suggest that it is also symmetric, so that it is 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. if it's not 24/7. Do we know what type of traffic is using Spring Garden Road in the areas where traffic is allowed? So from 8 p.m. to 7 a.m. What makes that more special, if you will, that it couldn't be 24/7? And as far as the pavement markings are absolutely subject to the time of year. We have some speed humps here in Lower Sackville that have still not been repainted following the fall season, so, or the following the winter. And I get that this is that this would be a priority as far as that goes, but they will wear down over time. They will have to be recovered, and so if we're relying on signage or pavement markings or things that are not physical barriers, I see there being a challenge. I also saw that Brad had his hand up for a little while. So if there are any answers that are possible through this meeting, that would be great. Otherwise, I would hope that that those are addressed in a future version of the report or when it comes back to council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Wondering if staff have any answers to the questions asked, please.
Madam Chair, maybe I'll try to answer some of the questions and then I'll let Brad step in. I think he had something from the previous question. Through you to the councillor, Madam Chair. With respect to the complex rules, you know, we're in agreement that is a challenge. It's one of the trade-offs that come with trying to make it work better at different times of the day. So the 7 a.m. to 8 p.m., the origin of that was we looked at the traffic data. That's when the traffic volumes were the highest, right? So that's when the transit priority would benefit the most from the vehicles, not the congestion not being there. You know, so there is potential to change that. As I mentioned, it could be more symmetrical. It could be 7 to 7, for example, to make it easier to understand. And we didn't really even get a chance to understand after 4 days just how much of an impact that had on the rules. It's just given the fact that we've been able to reflect more, it's one thing that we see as being a potential to change. Again, we're always learning on these projects, trying to figure out, you know, what works well and what doesn't. So, you know, we think 24 hours is probably going to be the easiest, but we will look at other solutions, you know, in terms of symmetry, if that makes more sense. You'd asked about temporary barrels and buses and how that would work. And that's one of the reasons why we can't block, like I've said earlier, we don't want to block one side of the street. We want to place the barrels in a manner that narrows the lanes up on the entry to the street, provides an opportunity to have more signage at street level that's visible to drivers. But the barrels would need to be placed such that buses can still proceed in both directions through the intersection, which is, you know, there is space to do that at the intersection. So but that would require consideration on how we'd install it. Why you wondered why would one sign work better than another, and we're not suggesting that is the solution. I think that's just one of a number of potential improvements that we could have through here. We did look at, you know, the signage that we have there. We think that there are better ways to do it, but the signage alone we're recognizing likely isn't going to be enough to make it work properly. And pavement markings, yeah, agree with you on that. You know, if there was if pavement markings were going in for this for a long period of time, you know, we can always consider different types of pavement markings. There's paint, there's thermoplastic, and different costs and different benefits associated with those different pavement marking types that we would consider.
You satisfied, Councillor Russell, with the answers?
I'm confused about the barrels with buses. If buses can get around the barrels where they're placed, A, they can be moved, and B, cars can get around them equally. So would appreciate some further consideration on that. Thank you.
Sure, and I mean, it's part of the reason that we don't feel confident in the barrel solution and moving forward with it. It's, you know, it does have challenges. You know, vehicles would likely proceed through it, but it probably would be effective, certainly more effective than than not having them. And you know, there's a range of challenges. Like I mentioned earlier, they need to be set up every day, taken down every night. People would have to go back and make sure they haven't been moved or the wind hasn't blown them over, and so on and so on, right? So again, it's not, these are the limitations associated with that feature, that, and part of the reason that we're not recommending proceeding with it as an option.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Connors. I have Councillor Mason for the next speaker, please.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. So what I learned on the peninsula about barrels during the slow streets thing at the start of COVID is that they will be just taken. I have 30,000 university students and young people on the peninsula who will explore how they can be used in different configurations than intended. So unless we filled them with water, which the traffic authority was not thrilled about the idea, so that they couldn't be moved and became a real physical barrier, that wouldn't work. On the two-way on Birmingham and Dresden, that's something that is a key part of making Spring Garden Road work, is we moved all the loading onto the side streets because we narrowed the main street. And it's something that businesses had actually been advocating for years, decades, like from before I was even elected. So, you know, there's a very specific issue at Virtue, but I wouldn't want to abandon the whole thing. Moving transit to Morris was a disaster as someone who takes transit, and from the point of view of Morris Street and Schmidtville, having the 800 buses go through there wasn't great. The potential bike lane going through there would reduce the ability to do that. But the big thing is, as Patricia kind of said, is people want to go to Spring Garden Road, and there isn't really space there. Even if we decided to do it and not do a bike lane there, and we didn't care what the residents say, we couldn't really put the bus stops there and stuff that we require with the shelters because the road's just even narrower. So it's good as an alternative when we're doing essential work, but it's not a better choice in Spring Garden Road. And then the flaggers piece that you asked Councillor Mancini, that goes right back to where we were at with the Motor Vehicle Act. Specifically says construction flaggers can only do one thing and they can't do anything else. It has to be construction. And that's why we can't hire them to close streets for events, which is something that I tried to do right when, 10 years ago, until the Motor Vehicle Act has changed. We have to use police, which is frankly silly and a waste of money and not a good use of their time. I just want to emphasize this is essential that this pilot be brought back as fast as possible and be made to work, because this pilot and things like it are essential to making IMP happen and our future for all residents coming into the core and going into Burnside to go to work who travel on the bus. We need to be able to make things like this work for bus rapid transit and all our other ambitions in terms of transforming mobility. So we have to dig in and make it work. I will say though, I'll make my amendment now. I'd like to add to the end of the second part, after approach for the pilot project, the words "for a spring 2023 implementation." So moved.
Can I get a seconder, please?
Mancini's mouth's moving, but I can't hear him.
Second it.
There you go.
There you go.
Thank you.
So on this, I know staff are saying we don't, and Mike, I'm looking at your face and you're thinking, if I can put words in your mouth, what is he doing? I just said I can't guarantee I can get it done by spring. And I'm listening to you, man, I am, but it still means you're returning to the Transportation Standing Committee with a recommended approach. And that recommended approach could be June or July if you have to, if construction can't happen, if supply can't happen, if all the MacPass transponder controlled gates are already spoken for the next year because of supply chain. But we need to keep moving this along. The public needs to know that we're taking this seriously and we're moving it along. So I know that's a tight timeline. I know it's hard to consult with people between now and into Christmas, but I think we really need to see this come back to committee in March or April of next year, so that as soon as construction season starts, which to the people following along at home, we don't get warm asphalt until around the middle of May. So it's not happening before that. Like if we got to dig holes in the ground to put in gates, like that's kind of the window is May, June. But we want to know what our options are and have a timeline that we can get behind publicly at that point. So that's my amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. I have Councillor Russell for the second time, please.
Thank you. So what I'm concerned about with this is that any of the traffic control measures that would be put in place that would be effective, I don't think would be temporary. And what we have just heard is the construction through the winter would be a challenge. So if this is a hard stop or a hard implementation in spring of 2023, that only leaves the winter for construction. So when it comes to the May-June timeframe to actually turn it on, everything will have had to be done by then. And I don't see that is possible to get it done that soon. So again, with a spring 2023 implementation, all of the planning and construction and design and all of that stuff will have to happen prior to that, and I don't see how that's possible. Thank you.
Anybody like to respond, please?
Madam Chair, through you to the councillor, I guess also to remind Councillor Mason, I believe the report does indicate that we intend to return to the TSC in February at the latest to provide a recommendation, which would be in line with getting a spring implementation. We hope. We're just reluctant to put a date down. Spring is, I hope, doable. In terms of, the design and the planning work can be carried out over the next couple of months. If we can return to the TSC early in 2023 with a recommendation, it all depends on what we recommend, right? Like if it depends on what the traffic control measures that we recommend. And we don't know exactly what type of implications putting gates, for instance, would have. We have to figure out where could they fit. Are they more of a permanent installation style gate like you see at the Highfield terminal, or is it something like you see in Banff, which is something that's installed every spring and taken out every October? So it depends what level of investment council is willing to make in that, and what kind of physical parameters are on street that dictate how it's done. So we're optimistic that something could be installed by spring. But it all comes down to what exactly it is.
Thank you. The next person I have up is Councillor Mason for the second time on the amendment, please.
To Councillor Russell's concerns, astronomical summer starts Wednesday, June 21st at 11:57 ADT in Nova Scotia. So I would argue there's a big space of spring still after we could start construction. It doesn't have to start in the winter. But if it would give comfort to the committee, we could just put the report does say this, but it's not in the motion. I would be willing to consider a friendly amendment that the pilot project report to return in February 2023. Right. My key is that there's nothing instructive and binding that's timely, right? That sets the time on this, and I want us to be unambiguous. So if someone wants to make that friendly amendment, it would be friendly. I feel a spring of 2023 implementation to me is it could start. They could start putting up signs end of May.
Do I have a seconder for that? I believe.
So I do. I'll make that amendment, Madam Chair. I believe it's a friendly amendment since I second the original amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Mancini. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak at this time?
If I could, we're talking about spring 2023 implementation of the traffic control measures that are installed on Spring Garden Road. And unless we want something that is only temporary or only signage or only paint, I don't see how we could do anything that would have a permanent physical impact as a traffic control measure on Spring Garden Road. So I can't agree with that timing. Thank you.
Mr. Connors, do you have a response, please?
Sure. Yeah, Madam Chair, through to the councillor. Again, it comes down to what gets installed, and we've seen from the Banff example, they have a gate solution that they install in the spring of every year and take it down in the fall. So, we intend to explore the range of possibilities that are possible. We're not looking to a permanent solution right now. We're looking to a pilot implementation. So it doesn't need to be necessarily need to break ground. Like, there probably will be aspects of it that would, if a gate, for example, was the way forward. But really, what we want to do is explore the range of possibilities. It could be a Banff style gate. It could be something else entirely. But until we get into it, we won't know. But I'm encouraged by what we see in Banff, because in practice, they've done it. And I think they have a climate that's probably harsher than ours is.
So if I may speak, Madam Chair, I guess this is a point of order, is that we have a friendly amendment proposed, which is friendly to me, but I think who seconded the amendment in the first place? Was it Councillor Mancini or Councillor Russell? Councillor Mancini?
Mancini.
So that means that the amendment to the motion has been amended so that it now reads the approach to the pilot project for February 2023. So what it now reads is bring that report back to Transportation Standing Committee for February 2023. That amendment was accepted. So that's what I just wanted to be clear. So that's what we'd be voting on when we vote on the amendment in a minute.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Mason. And clerk, could you take us through the voting process, please?
Yep, so it's just a show of hands for the voting process for standing committees.
Great,
Question
thank you
on the
very much.
amendment, Madam Vice Chair.
On the amendment, thank you, Councillor Mason. I'd like to have a show of hands in support of the amendment, please. So that carries.
You'll have to call for the nays.
Oh, I'm sorry. Those opposed? Thank you,
Opposed.
Councilor Russell. That amendment carries, and we're going back to the main motion now. Thank you. Councilor Mason?
So question on the main motion.
Thank you. Looking for the question on the main motion, please.
You'd ask all those in favor.
Oh, okay, sorry. All those in favor signify by raising your hand.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries. Not seeing anything else that we're going to deal with this morning during the special meeting. If there's nothing else, I'll call for the adjournment, please.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Russell, and thank you everyone for attending this meeting.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye now.